I just hope I get one who doesn't think nudity is the last word in fashion. As I enter the dining car, Effie Trinket brushes by me with a cup of black coffee. She's muttering obscenities under her breath. Haymitch, his face puffy and red from the previous day's indulgences, is chuckling. Peeta holds a roll and looks somewhat embarrassed. Sit down, says Haymitch, waving me over. The moment I slide into my chair, I'm served an enormous platter of food. Eggs, ham, piles of fried potatoes. A tureen of fruit sits in ice to keep it chilled. A basket of rolls they set before me would keep my family going for a week. There's an elegant glass of orange juice. At least, I think it's orange juice. I've only ever tasted an orange once, at New Year's, when my father bought one as a special treat. A cup of coffee. My mother adores coffee, which we would almost never afford, but it only tastes bitter and thin to me. A rich brown cup of something I've never seen. They call it hot chocolate, says Peeta. It's good. I take a sip of the hot, sweet, creamy liquid, and a shudder runs through me. Even though the rest of the meal beckons, I ignore it until I've drained my cup. Then I stuff down every mouthful I can hold, which is a substantial amount, being careful not to overdo it on the richest stuff. One time, my mother told me that I always eat like I'll never see food again, and I said, I won't unless I bring it home. That shut her up. When my stomach feels like it's about to split open, I lean back and take in my breakfast companions. Peeta is still eating, breaking off bits of roll and dipping them into hot chocolate. Haymitch hasn't paid much attention to his platter, but he's knocking back a glass of red juice that he keeps thinning with a clear liquid from a bottle. Judging by the fumes, it has some kind of spirit. I don't know Haymitch, but I've seen him often enough in the hob, tossing handfuls of money on the counter of the woman who sells the white liquor. He'll be incoherent by the time we reach the capital. I realize I detest Haymitch. No wonder the District 12 tributes never stand a chance. It isn't just that we've been underfed and a lack of training. Some of our tributes have still been strong enough to make a go of it, but we rarely get sponsors, and he's a big part of the reason why. The rich people who back tributes, either because they're betting on them or simply for bragging rights of picking a winner, expect someone classier than Haymitch to deal with. So, you're supposed to give us advice, I say to Haymitch. Here's some advice. Stay alive, says Haymitch, and then bursts out laughing. I exchange a look with Peeta before I remember I'm having nothing more to do with him. I'm surprised to see the hardness in his eyes. He generally seems so mild. Yeah, that's very funny, says Peeta. Suddenly he lashes out at the glass in Haymitch's hand. It shatters on the floor, sending the blood-red liquid running towards the back of the train. Only, not to us. Haymitch considers this a moment, then punches Peeta in the jaw, knocking him from his chair. When he turns back to reach for the spirits, I drive my knife into the table between his hand and the bottle, barely missing his fingers. I brace myself to deflect his hit, but it doesn't come. Instead, he sits back and squints at us. Well, what's this? Says Haymitch. Did I actually get a pair of fighters this year? Peeta rises from the floor and scoops a handful of ice from under the fruit tureen. He starts to raise it to the red mark on his jaw. No, says Haymitch, stopping him. Let the bruise show. The audience will think you've mixed it up with another tribute before you've even made it to the arena. That's against the rules, says Peeta. Only if they catch you. That bruise will say you fought. You weren't caught. Even better, says Haymitch. He turns to me. Can you hit anything with that knife besides a table? The bow and arrow is my weapon, but I've spent a fair amount of time throwing knives as well. Sometimes, if I've wounded an animal with an arrow, it's better to get a knife into it, too, before I approach it. I realize that if I want to get Haymitch's attention, this is my moment to make an impression. I yank the knife out of the table, get a grip on the blade, and then throw it into the wall across the room. I was actually just hoping to get a good solid stick, but it lodges in the seam between two panels, making me look a lot better than I am. Stand over here, both of you, says Haymitch, nodding to the middle of the room. We obey, and he circles us, prodding us like animals at times, checking our muscles, examining our faces. Well, you're not entirely hopeless. Seem fit. And once the stylists get a hold of you, you'll be attractive enough. Peeta and I don't question this. The Hunger Games aren't a beauty contest, but the best-looking tributes always seem to pull more sponsors. All right, I'll make a deal with you. You don't interfere with my drinking, and I'll stay sober enough to help you, says Haymitch. But you have to do exactly what I say. It's not much of a deal, but still a giant step forward from 10 minutes ago when we had no guide at all. Fine, says Peeta. So help us, I say. When we get to the arena, what's the best strategy at the cornucopia for someone? One thing at a time. In a few minutes, we'll be pulling into the station. You'll be in the hands of your stylists. You're not going to like what they do to you. But no matter what it is, Don't resist, says Haymitch. But, I begin. No buts. Don't resist, says Haymitch. He takes the bottle of spirits from the table and leaves the car. As the door swings shut behind him, the car goes dark. There are still a few lights inside, but outside it's as if night has fallen again. I realize we must be in the tunnel that runs up through the mountains into the capital. The mountains form a natural barrier between the capital and the eastern districts. It's almost impossible to enter from the east except through the tunnels. This geographical advantage was a major factor in the districts losing the war that led to my being a tribute today. Since the rebels had to scale the mountains, they were easy targets for the capital's air forces. Peeta Mellark and I stand in silence as the train speeds along. The tunnel goes on, and I think of tons of rock separating me from the sky, and my chest tightens. I hate being encased in stone this way. It reminds me of the mines and my father, trapped, unable to reach sunlight, buried forever in darkness. The train finally begins to slow, and suddenly bright light floods the compartment. We can't help it. Both Peeta and I run to the window to see what we've only seen on television, the capital, the ruling city of Panem. The cameras hadn't lied about its grandeur. If anything, they've not quite captured the magnificence of the glistening buildings in a rainbow of hues that tower into the air, the shiny cars that roll down the wide paved streets, the oddly dressed people with bizarre hair and painted faces who've never missed a meal. All the colors seem artificial, the pinks too deep, the greens too bright, the yellows painful to the eyes, like a flat round disc of hard candy we can never afford to buy at the tiny sweet shop in District 12. The people begin to point at us eagerly as they recognize the tribute train rolling into the city. I step away from the window, sickened by their excitement, knowing they can't wait to watch us die. But Peeta holds his ground, actually waving and gawking at the crowd. He only stops when the train pulls into the station, blocking us from their view. He sees me staring at him and shrugs. "Who knows," he says. "One of them may be rich." I have misjudged him. I think of his actions since the reaping began, the friendly squeeze of my hand, his father showing up with the cookies and promising to feed Prim. Did Peeta put him up to that? His tears at the station, volunteering to wash Haymitch but then challenging him this morning when apparently the nice guy approach had failed? And now the waving at the window, already trying to win the crowd? All of the pieces are starting to fit together, but I sense he has a plan for me. He hasn't accepted his death. He is already fighting hard to stay alive. Which also means that kind Peeta Mellark, the boy who gave me the bread, is fighting hard to kill me.